All right, Ritu Bhasin.
Hi there, Raj.
Hi, sweetheart. Well, you know what I need to do is I need to give you a formal introduction, but I'm going to be very, preface with it because, my first question for you is for us to kind of set a bit of context around our conversation since it's an important one today, and it's always important when you're in the room. So let's just get right into it, sweetheart. First of all, I want to officially welcome everybody on Facebook, on Instagram, and everywhere else that you are. I want to welcome you to another edition of Anoki Uncensored Live. I'm your host this week, Raj Girn, the founder of the umbrella brand Anoki Life. And today's topic, folks, it's called, What's the Big Deal About Inclusivity Anyway? And I decided to explore this at this particular time, especially because when something as important as this comes and becomes like an artifact of pop culture, on one side, it's flipping awesome because finally it becomes mainstream. But on the other side, its meaning and significance can be lost in translation or even become almost, dare I say, less important because everyone's talking about it. And a lot of voices, especially a lot of loud voices, may sometimes be getting it wrong. And sometimes that could be worse than people not hearing it. But we're going to hear from Ritu about that. But before we do, I just want to give you guys context around why I decided that in order to do justice to this whole topic of inclusivity that also includes a wider discussion about diversity and representation and what it means in society and in the workforce and in our lives in general. I knew that I needed to bring in an expert to have this discussion. I didn't want to have this discussion with a girlfriend or somebody that wasn't as well versed in this. So, I was just so happy that the president of Bhasin Consulting, my good friend, a woman I admire for so many reasons, Ritu Bhasin, decided that she was available and she could come on the show. Ritu, I'm so pleased to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this deep dive, of which I know you'll be doing the heavy lifting since you're the girl that knows the conversation. Thank you for being a part of this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, Raj, to speak with you, always. And thank you for everything that you have done in advancing inclusion in the arts and media for women, for people of color, women of color, the South Asian diaspora. So kudos to you.
Thank you, sweetheart. We do it together, right? Like we rise together. It's the only way. So let me just give a bit of context around Ritu's story a little bit, and then we'll dive right in. Is that okay with you, Ritu?
Perfect.
Brilliant. So Ritu is an inclusion and empowerment advocate. Academically, she trained as a lawyer and has an MBA. She is an award-winning speaker and consultant who is globally recognized as an expert in diversity and inclusion, women's advancement, and authentic leadership. She is known for her expertise in cultural competence, unbiased, conscious unbiased, and neuroscience strategies, all of which I can't wait for you guys to hear more about. If I could even say the words right, Ritu. And she has coached hundreds of professionals, leaders, and executives just around this whole wheelhouse of being more inclusive. She has won numerous awards, including the 2019 SABA Diversity Award and the City of Toronto's William P. Hubbard Award for Race Relations. She's also a published author of a best-selling book, The Authenticity Principle, Resist Conformity, Embrace Differences, and Transform How You Work, Live, and Lead. Again, officially, Ritu, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right into it, sweetheart. I mean, the first obvious question I want to ask you is, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. I mean, if you could share what it was like and how you personally define your understanding of identity around that.
Right. So I was born in Canada, Indian immigrant parents, and in particular, we're Punjabi by culture. We're Sikh by faith. My father was a turban, the full deal. My parents came to Canada in the early 70s at a time when Toronto, which is where they settled, was not racially diverse. I had the quintessential immigrant upbringing story where my parents came with very little money, worked really, really hard to move up the social classes. We grew up in Toronto proper, like the inside of Toronto, in a very working class neighborhood, quite racially diverse, because that's where, the intersection of class or a lack of class privilege meets with nationality, immigration status, and more. But when I was around the age of 11, my parents made the really strategic decision to move us to like the whitest place they could move us to, which was just north of the city, to a place called Unionville. And Unionville was extremely affluent at the time, still is, very white, homogeneous. It was a massive financial stretch for my parents to move us there. They moved us to the immigrant side of Unionville, where the new residences, where like the immigrants were moving in, new subdivisions. Anyhow, they did this so that we could have access to social networks they didn't have as new immigrants to the city, to the country. They did it so that we would get access to better education, which was borne out. But they also did it because they knew, as brown-skinned kids navigating through white Canadiana, that we would need to learn how to shift cultural codes. And, all of that is true. All of it was borne out. The problem is that in moving us there, I experienced a very homogeneous neighborhood. I experienced relentless childhood racist bullying, and I'm a survivor of racist childhood bullying, which was deeply traumatic. I learned at a very young age, the more I showcased my brownness and my girlness, smart girlness, the fact that I wasn't fancy like everyone else around me, it attracted social isolation and rejection like bullying. So that was very formative for me in terms of my early development. I also was, I think I was around the age of 8 or 9 when the 1984 Sikh genocide happened. And so I was acutely aware of like how the Sikh community experienced racism, marginalization in India. My parents talked a lot about partition. My mom is a feminist. My father would never say I'm a feminist, but he essentially is a feminist. So I grew up in a household where there was like a lot of both my parents were in unions. I grew up in a household where there was like a lot of conversation about social justice and rights and human rights and more. And so it had a huge impact on me and my identity, because first and foremost, I am a social justice warrior. In fact, I call myself a warrior princess. Like if you follow me online, you'll know that I'm constantly talking about social justice. It's in my blood because I literally hail from a clan of warriors as a Sikh, as a Punjabi person.
Yes.
And then, right, like full on, like it literally pulses through my blood. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, I would say the conversations in my household, all the stuff I went through, my parents went through, the community was going through, it really had an impact on me and my identity.
Absolutely. So what would you say at that time when this impact was happening in the, in the part of Ontario that you lived in? How did you identify at that time? Like, did you identify more? Did you go in more? Did you go in more into your culture, or did you kind of reject it? Like, what happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about this in my book. I wrote a book called The Authenticity Principle. So because I grew up with essentially white kids, I had a very unique, I straddled cultures, because on evenings and weekends, my parents would drive us to the West End or to drive us to parts where it's like we would hang out with the brown folk, like Punjabi family friends. But because I was going to school with a bunch of white kids, when I was with my Punjabi family friends, they would look at me like I was a coconut because I was not Punjabi enough. But then when I was at school with the white kids, it was like, you're not white, you're brown. And so throughout my teenage years, I felt like a social misfit. Like I didn't know where home was. I didn't know what my identity was or should be. And in fact, I call it my ethnic identity crisis. I've done a video on that online, which you can check out, where for so many years, if you said to me, who are you as a cultural person? Like I would have said to you, like, obviously I'm Canadian and I'm Punjabi, but really, did I feel belonging? Did I feel like I could exhale and feel at home in a community? No. Mm-hmm. That took me years.
And so fast forward to now, what or whom do you identify as?
Okay, so I love that question. You know why? Because I teach it for a living. Like I'm in my inclusion work, I'm like, who are you as a cultural being? Like, how do you identify? So I think a lot about this question. I would say to you, first and foremost, I identify as being a woman of color. Like, to me, the intersection between my gender identity and my racial ethnocultural identity, they're just so tied. So I identify as being a woman of color. I definitely identify as being Canadian, and I'm so proud to be Canadian. Mm-hmm. I would be the first to tell you all of what's wrong systemically in Canada. And at the same time, I would say, here we are in this horrible COVID moment. And I'm like, thank you to the highest that I get to live in Canada and not another country in the world. So I do identify as being Canadian, but I identify as being Punjabi. I identify as being Sikh. And frankly, I identify as being a mishmash of cultures. Mm-hmm. So in my video, for example, online, I talk a lot about how I'm a mishmash. Like, so for example, I love Canadian things like winter walks, but I love my Bhangra music. And I'm also influenced by the cultures around me. Like, I'm a massive, massive follower of soca music, which is from Trinidad, which I love, love, love. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So definitely a mishmash of cultures. I think that, one of the things that has given me the most peace is understanding that there's so many layers to identity, right? Like, identity is it's fluid, it's contextual, it is complicated. And I think that gives me peace. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. It totally resonates, sweetheart. I mean, I grew up in a very similar situation as you. I mean, my parents moved us to kind of South Wales. We were the only Indian brown family in the tiny little village that we lived in. And it was interesting because, our parents were very, very staunch pro-culture. Meanwhile, there was no cultural elements within our arena for us to be able to identify with. So our only point of identification was, our weekly visits to the city of Cardiff, because we lived just outside there in a tiny little mining village, where there were other brown people. And there was like the one or two Indian stores where you could go buy, VHSs of Bollywood films and things. So my identification for my culture as I was going through my teens was very Bollywood. Like, I thought that brown people lived like that. Right. And I kind of feel that my parents kind of sort of felt that that's how we needed to live, because they were very displaced from the India that they knew. Yeah. And I'm sure that you went through that as well. So this whole idea of, making sure that, because, I come from 4 girls, making sure that, the girls were properly married and that it was their, responsibility as parents to make that happen. Yeah. Put me and my older sister into arranged marriages. So, so I can identify with you. What is identity? This question is so important to me. And I think it's been this kind of long life journey that I've been on with Anoki, with myself as, an individual woman, as well as kind of the society as we see it change. And, is it more accepting? Is it less accepting? That's a whole other topic of discussion, right? But it's always been, at kind of the precipice of every single discussion I've had with myself. Right. I know that you know what I'm talking about there, because there's so many layers. There's so many layers. Right. And we could like really, dissect that. And I'm going to have you come back on where we have a personal discussion about that. But for want of staying on track with this conversation, I want to ask you something about, what that kind of gap was between, you going to school. I mean, you spent a number of years as a lawyer, you got your MBA, and then all of a sudden here you are going into entrepreneurship. You took that leap from corporate to entrepreneurship, and you decided to open up your own consulting firm. I know that has something to do with the journey you've been on, as a woman, as an ethnic woman, this whole idea and concept around identity. But then also, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the kinds of things that you faced in the corporate arena too. I don't want to preface the conversation. I want to hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about the bridging of that gap and deciding to open your own consulting firm.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I would say one of the things that COVID has taught me, so COVID has taught me a bunch of stuff. Like I could go on and on and on about what has been revealed to me. But one of the things that really struck me last year is that I celebrated the 10-year anniversary of running my consulting firm. We work globally.
Yay, so wow.
I know, right? It's so exciting. I was supposed to do like this big, massive celebration for that and my birthday. And unfortunately, none of that happened. But hey, why not? Maybe this year, maybe in 2025, who the hell knows? Anyhow, so I, with 10 years under my belt last year, I realized like, wow, Ritu, you are a bona fide business person. Like, don't hold back. Don't feel like an imposter anymore about this. Like, don't shy away. Step into your power. Stand in your power. Because as businesses were getting weathered through COVID, like I pivoted quickly and I really dug deep in being resilient and all of that. So what's fascinating to me is like, so I grew up again, typical quintessential like immigrant Punjabi household where it was like my parents had jobs. They were part of unions, and it was like, we have union jobs. This is a very safe thing. So don't become an entrepreneur, get a job and stay in your job because then you'll have job security and blah, 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 blah. So I never really grew up thinking or feeling like I was an entrepreneur. Now with the benefit of hindsight, having done an MBA and now with like 10, 11 years of business experience under my belt, I'm like, I am such a hardcore entrepreneur. Like I'm a business person through and through. Like sometimes I joke with my friends, I'm like, I just want to quit this all and like open up a fruit juice stand on a beach in the Caribbean. And they're like, are you kidding? Like within like a year, you will have like franchised it, expanded throughout the islands, like whatever. I'm like, right, good point. So I just didn't connect with the idea that I was entrepreneurial. But when you look back at my history or my childhood upbringing, I'm like such an entrepreneur. I had like a lemonade stand and I ran my own paper route. And I did magic shows for the neighborhood. I mean, I could go on and on. Anywho, so
I love this about you.
Like, well, do you know what's really interesting? Let's go back to multiple layers of identity. Because I'm a social justice advocate, a warrior princess, I also grew up at a time where we were taught, like, oh, you're a warrior princess? Warrior princesses don't do business. Like, it's like if you have a social justice heartbeat, which I do, that doesn't go hand in hand with capitalism or entrepreneurship or whatever. And so I didn't connect the dots on it. But here is something that I did very strategically 10 years ago or 11 years ago now when I launched my business. Many other organizations, when they're launched for the context of creating social disruption and building an equitable, more inclusive society or disruption, may choose to do that through a nonprofit route. I said, no way. I'm going to be for profit and I'm going to interrupt the way consulting work is done in my field. Why? Because I want to be disruptive. I want to disrupt the norm. And when I say the norm, like in the leadership space, as in the public speaking space, since I'm a professional speaker, it's male dominated, it's white male dominated, and there are normatives and patterns around white men getting ahead and as women of color in particular being left behind. And I was like, not on my watch. I'm going to disrupt the way business is done. I'm going to disrupt in my space. I want to be in a place where if all the penguins are going this way, I'm going to be like, no, I'm going that way. And I'm bringing you with me. So, because that's really actually where innovation and creativity are born out of. It's like doing things differently. And so it's really important to me. And not just because I care about entrepreneurialism and business. I care as a woman of color about disruption. I care about interrupting these systems of power, privilege, and supremacy that enable people from certain groups to get ahead while others get left behind. And that's where our disruption and creativity can really help.
You know, I love what you said there, Ritu, because, you know, in order to really disrupt, you need to go to kind of the nucleus of where the power is. And the power is in the economy, it's in the money, it's in the corporates. That's where you need to make the change. And that's where you have been making quite the mark in what you do. So let's talk a little bit about that. Here you are in the corporate, environment. Before it was cool to be into diversity and inclusion. Yes. There you were.
Yes.
With your flag of diversity, inclusion, and representation needs to matter. Right. And this is why. So let's talk a little bit about why you decided to go that route. Why?
Yes.
Why was it important for you? Why has this been a mission and a passion for you? That you were able to actually turn around a really difficult decision for corporates, because oftentimes they don't understand the connection between why all of these things will actually help them make more money. Will help them actually create more enterprise and opportunity, because
right.
Diverse thought processes, perspectives bring a whole other thing to the table. And if we didn't have that, with all right. of what's happening right now, right, we didn't have innovation. Innovation requires different perspectives. Then where would we be sitting today? I mean, look at a lot of the startups, look at a lot of the, entrepreneurs out there. They come from our types of backgrounds. There's not enough women, which is another discussion.
Right.
But let's talk a little bit about that. You went heavy into the corporate arena because
yes.
you wanted to affect change right yes. where the power dynamic was. Talk to me about what that journey yes. was like for you.
It was not easy.
No.
So let's start with that. So a few mm-hmm. things. First of all, I made the decision to become an entrepreneur, to be for profit, and I deliberately chose to dismantle systems of power, privilege, and supremacy in the corporate world, because this is an echelon, a sector in society that very few people have access to. But because I was already a lawyer, I was working on Bay Street, which is akin to the US Wall Street. Mm-hmm. I had access. I had an MBA. And I thought, like, if I'm not well situated to do this, who would be? First of all. Second of all, I was very aware that in order for us to build infrastructure in communities that have been marginalized and oppressed and don't have access, you need resources, and resources include money and economic power and political clout. So I also wanted to situate myself there mm-hmm. as a disruptive figure. So those two principles were really important to me. And, it's interesting because I was a lawyer for a few years on Bay Street, like big Canadian law. And then I transitioned to doing legal talent management. So I hated the practice of law. And so I ultimately ended up becoming an HR leader for one of the large Canadian firms. I did that for 7 years. And the tail end of it, when I made the decision to start my own consulting practice, I remember going office to office, sharing my news with the lawyers I worked with. And a lot of them did this. You want to do what? You want to start a diversity firm? And I could just see the look on their face, like, then she's going to go bankrupt, and then she's going to have to find a job, and blah, blah, blah. But I knew there was a need in this area, because I had a front row seat doing HR, mm-hmm. watching patterns around how consistently people of color, so Black professionals, Indigenous professionals, South Asian professionals who come from the LGBTQ communities, women, people who have lived experiences with disabilities and more, and the intersectionality, like the overlap of identities there, repeatedly were being left behind. And I was like, and by the way, on top of that, here I am in an elevated position, like I had a leadership role, and I was feeling excluded, like I couldn't belong. Like wow. I felt like I had to change who I am, change the way I speak, constantly worried about what I was wearing to work, constantly worried about what I was talking about, felt like I couldn't talk about my really immigrant, rude upbringing, the fact that I didn't grow up fancy and all that. And I'm like, I'm in management and I'm feeling this way. Like imagine how it must feel in the trenches.
Right.
All I knew, and from all outside appearances, it looked like things were amazing. Like it looked like, oh, she's so successful. Because, especially in like South Asian culture, like the markers of external success, like if you have a fancy job and a fancy title and you're making a lot of bling, it's like, oh, look how she's made it. And it's like, but in my soul, like spiritually, mm-hmm. I felt vacant. Like I did not feel connected. And I was like, and I know I'm not the only one. Like I cannot be the only one. So I left the law firm. I left Bay Street and started my own business, not just for the power disruption reasons that I talked about earlier. I also did it because I wanted to find joy for myself. I wanted to belong. I wanted a moment to actually take a step away from that curated world that felt so plastic and materialistic and vacuous, so that I can connect with myself and be like, who are you, Ritu? Like, because I felt so lost after 10 years in that space in the corporate world. It was like, and changing and morphing who I was. I was like, who are you? Who are you going to be? Who do you want to be? How do you want to reveal yourself? And I knew that doing my own thing, being autonomous, would make that happen. And it was borne out, because here I am. Like, I would say I'm living the most authentic life I've ever lived. And apparently with age, it gets better. So I'm like, bring on my 50s and 60s and 70s. So yeah.
So that's wonderful, sweetheart. I want to ask you something, because, you know, for those naysayers out there, people that actually don't understand how valuable inclusivity, diversity, representation, and all of that is, you know, within a corporate or an entrepreneurial environment, what would you say to them? Like, what can you say to them to kind of help them bridge that gap, the mindset piece, you know?
So every single piece of research that is connected back to why it is that equity, diversity, inclusion matter, why they drive organizational performance, why they help organizations to be more profitable, and more. All the research speaks directly to the fact that when we have the same group of people sitting around a table making decisions, or sitting via Zoom making decisions, haha, little virtual work world joke there for you, haha. Oh my God, my sister was watching right now. She's like totally grown and roll her eyes. Anyhow, so all of the research says that if you have the same people sitting around a table, so same gender, same nationality, same age, same region, same ethnoculture, whatever, we think the same. And literally the way in which our brains work as human beings, the way in which we intake clocked data stimuli from the environment, intake the data, sort the data, store the data, retrieve the data, is directly influenced by a range of factors, including our age and our gender and our nationality and ethnoculture and more. And so if you have the same people sitting around the table whose brains work exactly the same, it's going to lead to what I call same, like sameness.
Right, absolutely.
And so innovation is not born out of sameness, it's born out of differences. And so we know that when you have different people sitting at a decision-making table, using their brains differently, this is what yields creativity. And so it's a direct line to organizational performance, and frankly makes society better. Like, it's more interesting. Art is better, food is better, culture is better out of differences, not out of sameness.
Absolutely. So how would you say, as an expert in this arena, as somebody that has seen it done right and not done right, how do we get this right in the workforce environment? Like, any tips, anything that you can tell people to kind of help them figure that piece out? Because honestly, my experience, Ritu, has been that they actually literally don't get it. They don't know, that they really are ignorant.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts? Because I know you've been in those situations. I've seen your videos. I've seen when you get upset with people and you say, like, you know, these people honestly do not understand what they actually just did here in this circumstance. Right. So talk to me a little bit about that. How do we get it right in the workforce?
So a few things. First of all, here's the problem with holding power, privilege, and supremacy in society. When we have dominance, we benefit from that dominance, and it's really hard to give it up. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. People worry that if I make room for you, what does this mean for me? And people think largely out of what I call a scarcity mindset, as opposed to an abundance mindset. Like, one of the most important life lessons I've had is that there is abundance in this universe as opposed to scarcity. And then secondly, you shine, I shine. Like, this COVID moment is a real reminder for us about the interconnectedness of being. When one person hurts, like because they have COVID, the whole world is hurting because one person hurt. So I think that, like, we have to get people to shift out of this mindset of scarcity and start viewing the world as an abundance. Like, that we all benefit when everyone is thriving as opposed to hurting. But that's, a spiritual, philosophical mindset that not everyone can embrace. And especially because capitalism and greed and materialism permeates everything that we do in our society. And so this is part of the problem. That's one thing. Secondly, a lot of people who hold leadership roles within organizations across sectors, arts, media, entertainment, banking, law, education, it's held by homogeneous people. It's mostly men, mostly white men, mostly affluent, educated, cisgender, hetero, white men, Christian men. And the personal imperative around feeling exclusion hasn't been experienced, so there's less empathy.
Right.
So both of these things that I'm sharing with you now, they go to who we are as people and how we see other people, like the value we place on other people's lives. Those are two important principles that must be understood in creating systems disruption. So that's one thing. The other 2 points that I wanted to make are the following. First of all, on an individual level, each of us must work to interrupt the prejudice, the bias, the discrimination that we hold towards other people. Bias disruption is everything. And let me tell you why. Mm-hmm. When we consciously and unconsciously judge other people based on who they are tied back to their identities, like race, ethnoculture, like religion, like sexual orientation, disability, more, it causes other people to suppress their authenticity. So as I mentioned in writing my book called The Authenticity Principle, I did a lot of work and research in this space. And what I have found is that being on the repeated receiving end of other people's judgments and bias about who we are, that's what causes us to push down our authenticity.
Right.
So when we judge other people, they can't be who they are. And this strikes at experiences of belonging in the workplace and in society. It causes us to hide what makes us unique and different. It causes us to quash our creativity and innovation. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing that any of us can do individually to be more inclusive is to work to interrupt your biases. And I have a lot of resources like free tip sheets, worksheets, videos online about how to make that happen. And then the second thing that we do is we engage in what's called systems disruptions, which means from a workplace perspective, for example, taking a look at every single system we have in place to say, where are these biases embedded? So when I say biases, where is it embedded that white people are better than people of color? And let me be more direct, because here we are. This is not the time to be polite and politically correct. I'm going to be direct as F.
Absolutely.
Where is it that in our systems that we have in place, do we think white people are better? And South Asian people are better than Black people. East Asian people are better than Black people. South Asian, East Asian people are better than Indigenous peoples. In our workplaces, we hate to admit this. We don't want to admit this, but there is very much a racial, ethnocultural hierarchy in place which anchors whiteness and centers white people at the top, and then stratifies other communities of ethnocultural racial communities down this ladder. At the bottom of this ladder are Black people and Indigenous peoples globally, and other communities of color, ethnocultural communities, are higher up along this continuum. As South Asian professionals, we are situated higher up along this ladder, which means not only do we benefit by being more white adjacent, but also we have internalized anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous racism in how we think and feel and how we treat people as well. Because
of what we were taught.
100%.
The British Raj had a lot to do with that.
100%.
There's actually, that brings another point with that, based on what you just said. You kind of, created a lot of these kind of subcategories within, the Indian culture. Let's look at casteism. Let's look at, that in and by itself is probably the greatest divide that's ever been created by any culture anywhere in the world. And it's still as strong and prevalent as it ever was, irrespective of what, media wants us to believe or what the government wants us to believe. It's as strong as it's 1,000%. Ever been. And it's so strong that it's still strong here. There are so many cases within the workforce where, for example, the Dalit community are really, really, downtrodden upon in North America, in Silicon Valley. There's so many cases of this stuff. It's so in our culture, no matter what you want, no matter how much you feel it's not, it is,
Yes.
You and I, we grew up as sick women, right? Like, my grandmother was so pro-sick, and she was like, feminist, and, really kind of brought us up with that whole ideology. But then, other subcultures within the Indian community, right, kept making me second guess whether I am in fact who I'm being taught to be, because it's so ingrained with them, this whole caste system, which is just very much a part of what's happening here in North America, and it's based on more, color here.
Yes.
It's based on social status, but it's the same thing.
100%. So basically, in our society, old society, we have these ladders, these hierarchies where people are ranked and are stratified based on their positioning.
Right.
That's essentially what the caste system is, the racial, ethnocultural hierarchy, like racial supremacy, gender supremacy, and more. And what I think that's really interesting about this moment, and when I say this moment, I mean in the context of watching COVID and all the inequities in society globally around not only who's getting it, whose employment is being affected, who has access to vaccinations, healthcare, and more. Where we have this really pivotal, seminal moment here, that's where inequities are being revealed, in addition to this racial justice movement or racial injustice crisis, with an emphasis rightfully on anti-Black racism. So we're getting to see racism. There's a spotlight on racism, but also we see the farmers' protests in India, like all around the world. There's a spotlight on inequities. But what we're starting to see that's really interesting is what's called intersectionality. So intersection is the overlap of identities that come together to have a profound impact on how you experience systems like the workplace, like society, healthcare access, and more. And I think what's being borne out in this moment is how it's about race and ethnoculture, but it's also about your class. Like your socioeconomic standing in society. Because if you are affluent as a person of color, so you're a person of color, so you're lower along the racial ethnocultural hierarchy, but you have class privilege. Like, for example, I do, you do, because here we are, like the mere fact that we can even do this, others do. It gives us benefits. We have better access. But if you are repeatedly in these intersectional ladders along the bottom of these ladders, it's just inequity and after inequity, and it's systemic inequities. So I think this moment it gives us a powerful opportunity to take a look at, yes, the workplace, but society as a whole, even our own personal relationships. Like, what are we doing to interrupt these experiences? Like, for example, in the context of anti-Black racism or interrupting anti-Blackness, like, how are we as South Asians in our homes, with our children, with each other, calling out anti-Blackness? How are we calling out casteism? How are we calling out socioeconomic based privilege? Like, I have repeatedly in South Asian culture seen such bad, egregious behavior of how we treat people who are lower along the socioeconomic ladders.
Absolutely, so have I. And also colorism is massive in our 100%. Culture. That's another divisive, component of our society that's so ingrained. It's so ingrained.
1,000%.
And it's ridiculous to me. Like, my logical brain can't understand why you would treat someone differently.
Right.
I don't get it.
Well, shadeism or colorism is directly a byproduct of white supremacy, because it was taught to us to value whiteness over having dark skin or darkness, first of all. And then second of all, it also is present. It was already present in India because of the caste system tied back to who's South Indian, who's North Indian, who farms versus who's in the massive mansion Korti. It's like, so who's out in the thup and who isn't, right? Basically. And so all of these systems come together to have a pronounced impact. And then, but watch this, the colorism, shadeism ladders, the lighter your skin, the more fair you are, higher up at the top, darker the skin, you're at the bottom, intersects with race and ethnoculture, white people on top, black people on the bottom, darker skinned people in India, like on the bottom, right? Intersects with socioeconomic class backgrounds. Like in India, you're going to see lightness, fair skin at the top of the ladder, even in Canada, US, around who has affluence and power and who's at the bottom. So it's something that we need to open up our eyes to and start to use our voices to call out and our actions to shift and change.
Absolutely. And I really have to pick your brain on, two things that you just brought up, the BLM movement and also the Indian farmers' plight, right? Yes. So these are two things that have really, really shown up this past year. Yes. I want to ask you, why do you think this is showing up, and why do you think that there's been such global outcry and support around these two? In our lifetime, Ritu, we've never seen anything like this.
No.
So what are your thoughts around this? I'd love to kind of pick your brain on that.
Yeah, it's such a great question.
It's such a huge answer, right?
1,000%. So let me speak directly to the Black Lives Matter movement, because I had more time to think and digest that because it happened last year. Well, George Floyd's murder took place at the end of May. And really we've been in the, we've had the spotlight on anti-Black racism and anti-racism on a whole since, let's say, the beginning of June. And I think it's a confluence of factors. I think that, for example, when June hit, we were in the thick of COVID. People were at home for a long time, mobility, access, impacted, in addition to a very pronounced spotlight on racial inequities in society, like in the US in particular. And it was just, and people were more on social media, and it was just.
That's the game changer.
1,000%.
That's the game changer. If it wasn't on record,
right,
we wouldn't be talking about it today.
1,000%.
We would still have the narrative that we are taught by the big media houses that have their agenda on how or what they want to talk about, right?
1,000%. Like, so not only are people contributing more to social media, they're also consuming more social media, and so I think all of this put together, like the confluence of like repeated racist act after racist act, really caused this diversion. But what you just said really resonates with me. You'll remember last year, I saw caption after caption saying, it's not that they saw the video, it's that we saw the video.
Yes.
It's that we as society saw the video after video after video after video. And it was like, you already saw this video and you're doing nothing? Are you kidding? So I think that the power of the collective as it relates to social media was really profound in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial justice movement that we're watching. And I think the same thing is true with the farmers' protests right now in India. Like, I think, when I think about my 8 or 9-year-old self back in the 80s or 1984, when the Sikh genocide was happening, we didn't have social media then. Right. Here we are, many, and by the way, I know that this farmers protest is not just about Sikh farmers. It's about Hindu farmers, Muslim farmers, Christian farmers, every single farmers. This is a farmers protest. I'm just saying, my recollection as a Sikh and of experiencing, watching the genocide take place in the 80s. It's a whole different movement now when we're watching the Indian government engage in oppressive actions. It's spotlighted in a way that we would not have had access to in the 80s or the 90s. Like, here we are.
It's the social media again. Like, what has changed really? The oppression hasn't changed, right? It's centuries old. The top down corporate culture of politics hasn't changed.
No.
right? What's changed is that, the power has been put in the hands of the public from the perspective that we get to see what we couldn't see before. We are not buying into the narrative that we are told. We are seeing with our own eyes what's actually happening on the ground. And that's what's going on here. That's the only difference.
The image after image, and we can unite. There's power in the collective, and so I think that it's so powerful that we are able to come together collectively, and that's what social media has enabled us to do. Whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, whether it's the farmers protest, whether it's #MeToo, the Me Too movement, all of these movements enable us to come together as a collective. And again, it's not that they saw the video as the state. In fact, they're the perpetrators of the content on the video. It's that we've seen the video now. We've seen the pictures of the protests in India. We've seen what's happening when the government engages in racist actions towards Black and Indigenous peoples and more. It's like, and we are like, we will remain silent no more, because we can go to social media and share our voice through that. And so there's real power in the collective.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, time will tell what will happen. But, amongst this massive upheaval that we're having globally speaking, I feel kind of a ray of hope. I feel like something has got to give, because we can't allow this, now that we see it, to continue, right? We can't allow this. And I don't know if I'm speaking as an idealist, and perhaps I am, and that maybe there'll just be another person that I'll get put into that same position to want the same things, sitting at the top of that ladder or that pyramid that they're sitting on top of. I don't know, but I need to ask you this, Ritu, as a woman of color, as a woman that has seen kind of the corporate inequities, as a woman that as a girl you went through the things that you did that clearly told you that because you were different, that perhaps you weren't good enough, right? Looking back on that, the big picture moment of your life, what would you say that you've learned that has empowered you to be the woman that you are today?
Oh, Raj, these are such good questions. You go, girl. I get interviewed all the time. These are like some really good questions. This is like really good shit.
I'm so happy, baby doll, because I get to speak to an intelligent, thought-provoking woman who, like me, is constantly examining, what life is, and what what are we doing here, and what are we doing to each other? What are we doing to ourselves? You know what I mean? We are those women. So I get the opportunity to ask you these questions because I know that you've probably thought about it on some level. Yeah.
Bless. Thank you. That's so lovely of you to say. I'm so grateful. And, even in sharing with you, I like, it's exciting. When I get excited, I talk really fast and
I love it.
Talk really forcefully because I get so excited, and I'm feeling that way right now.
Oh my gosh. I'm so blessed.
So here's something that I've learned that I think, and I teach this a lot in my stuff. This is going to sound hippy dippy, but I don't give a shit because
I love hippy dippy.
Okay, so good. You're going to love this.
I'm a total weirdo. I love weird shit. So
okay, so good. So good. And also, because like as hardcore as I am, as like as an entrepreneur and as an activist and whatever, I'm still at the end of the day, like I every day I thank the highest that I get to live with grace and in this divine life, and it is not lost on me that my connectedness is to the greater universe and to the greater collective, and so I got the hippy dippy in me. So
I love it, sister. That's why we connect,
right? So here's something that I have learned. I have learned that one of the reasons that people hate on others is because they lack self-love. So we hate on others because we lack self-love. Because if you loved yourself and you were like, think about people like the Gurujis or people who really deeply were connected and anchored to the self. They weren't trying to, they don't try to tear other people down to fill their own cup. When you deeply love and embrace who you are, other people's happiness, you feel happy for them. You're like, you shine, I shine. We don't want to tear other people down. We recognize that tearing other people down, that's like a fool's game. It's fleeting. It'll never cause you to win. So we hate on others because we lack self-love. But here's the other related piece to this. One of the main reasons we lack self-love is because others constantly hate on us. So this is why it's a vicious cycle. So other people hate on us, we lack self-love, and then we end up hating on others. And so the number one thing that we can do that I have learned over having extensive therapy, and when I say extensive therapy, because of the racist childhood bullying and just other traumatic things that have happened to me over my lifetime, I have done a lot of psychotherapy. I've done a lot of personal healing work. I'm a trained yoga teacher, mindfulness teacher, and all of that.
It's the best. Every single person needs food, water, love, warmth, and therapy. Every single person.
100%. Here to that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have come to see through my experiences with therapy and more is that when we work on healing our woundedness as individuals, like basically take care of your shit, work on your shit, clean up your house, become better, grow as a person, feel good about who you are.
Yes.
You will radiate sunshine. You will radiate joy. You will put love out into this universe, which is what the world needs. We don't need more hate. We need more love. So, but love of the other starts with love of the self. We can't love others until we love ourselves. Right. So for me, this has been one of the most seminal, life-altering, spirits that I learned. And I learned actually, you know, I'm grateful as well. And I say thank you to the highest that I got to learn this life lesson earlier on in my life. Like I'm in my 40s. I think for a lot of people, they learn it in their 50s, 60s. So it's like the earlier you learn this lesson, the better, because it will literally transform how you live.
I completely agree. I learned it also in my late 30s, early 40s. And, you know, it's interesting because, I don't think I would have learned it if my life was fabulous and I didn't go through all the things that I went through. I was forced to fight for my right to be happy.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Right? I mean, I know you get that. I need to ask you because they're telling me to wrap up. How dare they? We're going to have you back on. So I want to ask you, anyone out there who, you know, is grappling with the idea of how to make sense of, because I want to bring it back around full circle, diversity, inclusion, representation, and they need help to figure that piece out in their organization, in their ecosystem. How can they get a hold of you, and what are some of the things that they can look at within your world?
Celeste, thank you for asking that. So first of all, I mean, you can check me out online. Bhasin Consulting is my corporate consulting site. If you go to the resources tab, we have literally dozens of free resources there. Everything from you're a leader and you're like, how do I be inclusive in the virtual world, to how do I teach my people how to interrupt biases and more. Every month we do free webinars to help people. So you can take a look at that site.
People need to hire you. Guys out there, knowledge is great, but knowledge is cheap. What's really important is having the consultative, the coaching around the experiential piece, and also the accountability piece, right? And this is what you get when you come to a firm that can provide you all of that. I just want to make sure that people understand that that's the difference here, that there's the knowledge piece, there's the action piece, like how do we actually put that knowledge into action? And then who's holding me accountable? Like, how is that piece fitting in? This is why you hire companies like Ritu's, Ritu, you need to let them know how to get a hold of you. It's important that people know, especially now that this is really coming out now into the mainstream. These discussions are being had. We want to make sure that the discussions are being had properly and appropriately. And we are, in fact, learning from the people that know how to implement these things in our ecosystems.
Brilliant. And I co-sign all of what you said. So you can reach out to me at basinconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn. My favorite place to get for people to reach out to me at is actually Instagram. So at Ritu_Bhasin. And then I would say, if you want to do your individual healing work as it relates to engaging in more self-love, so you hate others less, but also hate is coming in your way and you're internalizing a lot of hate and you're like, I need to do better at feeling better about who I am, then you can go to my empowerment site at ritubhasin.com. And I wrote a book called The Authenticity Principle, so you should check that out too.
Absolutely. And I've read it, guys. It'll change your mindset around this topic and and the confusion around what it is and what it isn't. Ritu, I love you, girl. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you so much. And back at you. And again, thank you for all that you do to give people a voice, because this is exactly what you do. And I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sweetheart. Thanks to everyone that tuned in on Instagram and on Facebook. And this is going to be available in a few days on our video platform. So if you didn't get a chance to see it all, if you want someone else to see it because you feel it's important, which it is, I want you to check back. We will be letting you guys know. And please hit up Ritu. She is the queen. And I have so much respect for her. And we will definitely be bringing her back. Thank you, my love. I really appreciate you. And I appreciate everyone for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.